Pop quiz. What's the single most important resource you have for improving on the GRE? Is it a huge stack of vocabulary flashcards? Is it a crazy number of practice problems? Or is it caramel, soy, grande macchiatos? Well, I'm Mason. I'm a test expert at Magoosh. And if you ask me, I would argue the single most important resource you have for making big gains in the GRE is a high-quality practice test. Now, before you start frantically Googling free GRE practice test, I'm going to walk you through the 4 do's and don'ts of taking a GRE practice test so that you can get the absolute most out of your investment of both time and energy, both of which will be required when taking a practice test. Psst, I'm also going to tell you where to find free practice tests. So grab a piping hot macchiato and let's get started. Number 1, do take a practice test early on in your studying journey. I can't tell you how many students I've tutored who have no idea how close or far they are to their score goals because they've never taken a practice test. Taking a practice test early on is the best way to get a clear and accurate sense of just how close you are to hitting your score goals on the GRE. Keep in mind that your GRE score is just one piece of a complex package of materials that you're submitting for your application. So you want to make sure you devote enough time so that you hit your score goals, but not too much time to where you end up with a subpar personal statement or an underdeveloped CV. So take a practice test early on, and that's going to tell you how close you are to getting that goal. Now, I'm fully aware of how scary it can be to take a practice test. Not only is it going to eat up most of a morning or an afternoon, it's also going to be incredibly mentally taxing. But so is the actual GRE on test day. So the earlier you start taking practice tests, the sooner you're going to build up some stamina that you absolutely need to make it through the entire test. Did I mention how incredible caramel macchiatos are? Grab one of these or your favorite beverage of choice, set aside a block of time, and take your practice test. Trust me, your future self will thank you for it. Number 2, do make sure you're taking a high quality practice test. I mentioned Googling a minute ago, and Googling is a very nice thing for when we're looking for something, but it can also take us to some places that we really don't want to go. See, not all practice tests are created equal, and therefore not every practice test is going to give you an honest reflection of how you're doing on test day. It's kind of like I'm incredible at Wii bowling, but when I go to an actual bowling alley, I tend to score something more like a gentleman's 45. You want to be taking a practice test that accurately reflects the format, concepts, and question types that you're actually going to encounter on the GRE. So it's worth doing a little bit of research before taking a practice test to make absolutely sure you're taking one that lives up to ETS's high standards. But I have some good news on that front. We here at Magoosh have already done a lot of that hard work by pulling together a list of places where you can find free, high-quality practice tests. Keep in mind also that you're going to probably end up taking more than one practice test, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I need more macchiatos. Number 3, do plan on taking more than one practice test. Now, unless your actual test is sometime next week, you're probably going to end up taking several full-length practice tests. Not only is taking full-length tests going to be good for building up your focus and your stamina, both of which you need on test day, but it's also going to provide you with ample opportunity to reflect and review your progress. Now, you're probably wondering, well, how many practice tests should I take and how often should I take them? This is where having a high-quality GRE study plan comes in. Stop. I know you're itching to Google free GRE study plan, but I have some good news again. We here at Magoosh have already put together some rock-solid study plans that should meet the needs of the majority of GRE test takers. These plans are built around different timelines, different strengths and weaknesses, and all of them will give you guidelines for when to take a practice test. The big takeaway here is that practice tests should be a cornerstone of your GRE preparation. So make sure you've located a handful of high-quality tests that you can conquer on a regular basis. Number 4, do set aside plenty of time to review your practice test results. Look, I've seen it and done it too many times to count. You've just finished your practice test, your caffeine buzz is worn off hours ago, you're dehydrated, you're tired, and you literally want to do anything but sit down and do more GRE studying. Now, this is a totally normal experience for the majority of practice test takers, and it's completely okay to feel this way, especially if your scores were not quite where you were hoping they would be. But this is a really big idea. The most valuable takeaway from a practice test is not your practice test scores. Rather, it's the mountain of data you now have to work with that reflects how you, as an individual, handle yourself on the GRE. So after your practice test is finished, get up, rehydrate, take a walk, do some yoga, whatever you have to do to decompress and recover, but make sure that you have a plan in place to set aside some time later that day, maybe the next morning, to review your practice results and figure out what went well on the test and what areas you need to work on. Look for some patterns in those results. Were there certain questions or concepts that you did really well on? Were there other questions that completely threw you off and you had no idea what to do? I recommend keeping 2 columns of what went well and what didn't quite go so well, because knowing your strengths and weaknesses is super useful for your test preparation. You might also want to consider what your pacing was like on the section. Did you run out of time before you got to the end? Or did you have time left over that you really weren't sure what to do with? Did any specific questions eat up way too much of your time and rob you from time that could have been spent elsewhere? The better you are at analyzing your practice test results, the more informed you're going to be as to what areas you have to work on and what changes you have to make to your study plan. I once tutored a financial analyst who developed an entire spreadsheet so that he could track his practice test results and run percentage analyses on correct versus incorrect answers in specific categories. Now, you don't have to be that thorough, but you should be heavily invested in your practice test results so that you can use those to your advantage. Get it? Invested. The student was a financial analyst. Whatever, I'm funny. We're going to pivot now to things you should avoid doing on practice tests, but if you're curious and want to learn more about study plans or practice tests, check out these other videos by my fellow Magoosh experts that dive deeper into those areas. Okay, still riding high on that macchiato bliss? Good, because we're about to talk about some things you should definitely avoid doing when it comes to practice tests. Number 1, don't take a practice test too casually. Look, it's all too easy to do. We're taking a practice test and we're like, it's just a practice test, right? It's totally fine for me to be texting, watching episode 7 of WandaVision while snuggling with my dogs during the test, right? Look, I love all of those things, but this is not the attitude to have on a GRE practice test. You want to treat that practice test like it's a trial run for launching a space shuttle and you're the astronaut in the shuttle. If you're that astronaut, you want everyone to take that practice test super seriously, right? The truth is, it's crucial to treat every practice test like you're taking the real test, because that's the only way to get accurate data and scores you can work with, and it's also the only way to build up stamina and focus that you have to have on test day. So make sure you find a quiet space with no distractions and focus on your practice test. Number 2, don't take practice tests too often. Look, I know, we just talked about the importance of taking multiple practice tests as part of your study plan. But there's also a real risk in taking too many tests or taking them too close together. It's crucial that you give yourself time to do specific work in those areas that you have to improve on before your next test attempt. So, find a schedule that fits for you and leaves ample time for recovery and preparation. It's like lifting weights. If you don't give your muscles some days off, you're just asking for injury and burnout, which I wish someone would have told me before I did leg day 8 days in a row. I'm going down. I'm good. Again, if you haven't checked out our Magoosh study schedules yet, you really should, because they're designed to prevent you from taking on too much too fast. Number 3, don't forget to use your free ETS practice tests. Did you know that when you register for your test, you get 2 free practice tests from ETS? That's right, you get 2 practice tests from the people that designed the real GRE. These are an incredible resource for you to use, and they often go unused by students who just weren't aware that they got these tests after registration. So follow this link to ETS's Power Prep materials to check out those resources. Also, did you know that as part of your Magoosh Premium subscription, you also get free practice tests? Because you do, and they're awesome, and they give you great detailed information that you can work with before your next practice test. I'm just saying, check them out. Number 4, don't get discouraged by your practice test results. Look, I know we covered this earlier, but it's really such a common experience for students to take a practice test and to feel let down by their performance because their practice test scores are nowhere close to their target scores. The first thing you should do is make sure those target scores are the scores you actually need to get into your target program. But the next thing you should remember is that the practice test scores are not the most important thing to take away from a practice test. Rather, it's that mountain of data you now have to work with, which will tell you where you have to put some work in order to improve. Remember, the GRE is not an intelligence test. It's not testing how good you are at math or how many big words you can memorize. Rather, it's just testing how well you know the GRE. Taking a practice test is a great way to get familiar with the test, the layout, the concepts, the question types, and the challenges that come with performing under timed pressure. So keep your head up and trust that with some analysis and some targeted practice, you're going to get more familiar with the GRE, and that's going to lead to a better performance. And if you're ever unsure of how to analyze your results or to adapt your study plan with those results, that's what we at Magoosh are all about. We have a help team of experts who know what you're going through and can offer you some awesome pro tips on making your GRE studying as enjoyable and as effective as possible. Hungry for more delicious morsels of GRE knowledge? Head on over to this video on how to use a GRE study plan taught by my fellow expert and vocabulary wizard, Chris Lele. This is Mason at Magoosh, reminding you that while the GRE may be hard, you don't have to go it alone. We here at Magoosh know exactly what you're facing and can help you show up in full force on test day. So subscribe to this channel, drop a comment, find some way to connect with our team because we'll go farther together.